You are now listening to the IELTS podcast.
Hello there, IELTS Essay Improvement, podcast number 3 out of a 3-part series. Let's get straight to it. Grab a pen, as we did in the last few episodes, write down these 2 sentences, analyse them, and then, after you've analysed them, listen again to the recording all the way through and see if you have identified the same problems as I did. Let's go. The biggest reason for insisting that international marketing has many bad sides is because of it has a power of command which is very powerful. Full stop. It could be reached everywhere, and it means that every single person in the world easily being a target without conscious. Now, we'll just stop at those 2 sentences. Hopefully you wrote those down. If you didn't, just rewind, go back a little bit, write them down, and then analyze them. Okay? And you'll find a couple of mistakes there, quite a few. So quickly, the first ones would be the use of basic vocabulary, the biggest. Or we could have substituted that for the most serious reason for insisting that international marketing has many bad sides. Well, instead of saying has many bad sides, we could say has numerous disadvantages. Okay, and that was just the first couple of words. The main problem here was that it didn't make any sense. Okay, I think what the writer was trying to say was that maybe the most serious reason for insisting that international marketing has numerous disadvantages is largely due to its power, or is because of the power it wields. And this way, like, hopefully you'll have identified, we'd have got rid of the repetition of the word power, powerful, which not only does it show a lack of vocabulary, but it also it clouds what the writer is trying to communicate. It makes it difficult to understand. The next sentence starts with, it could be reached everywhere. Now, I don't know what the subject is discussing. Are we talking about that consumers can be reached everywhere? And we've also got like a repetition of an argument. It says it could be reached everywhere, and it means that every single person. So we don't know who the subject pronoun it is referring to. Yeah? So maybe if we edited this for clarity, we could say consumers nowadays can be reached anywhere in the globe, and this means they can be targeted without consciousness. Okay? Without being aware would be the more appropriate way to say this. Okay? If they say in the first example, in the world easily being a target without conscious. Okay, is the person targeting, is that the person who lacks conscious, or are we talking about the consumer who's being targeted, without being aware of the fact that they're being targeted? So first of all, that would need to be edited just to make it a clear and coherent thought. Now, to improve it, we could say, instead of reached everywhere, we can put an idiomatic expression, and we can say consumers can be reached in every corner of the world. Yeah? And some of you might be saying that doesn't sound right, every corner of the world or every corner of the globe, but because the globe's circular, corners are rectangular, but the figure of speech comes from looking at the world as a map on the wall, in which sense we could say consumers from every corner of the world have been targeted, okay, or can be targeted. So that not only have we most importantly, improved the message and made it crystal clear what we're trying to say, but we've also managed to squeeze in an idiomatic expression. Now, be careful, because I read essays every single day where a writer has tried to force an idiomatic expression, and it doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound like a native speaker. So my advice is that if you are going to use an idiomatic expression, then make sure you are completely at ease and you know exactly the right place and time to use it. Otherwise it sounds odd and forced. Now, the way to become aware of the correct time and place to use it is to get feedback, is to start incorporating it in your essays and getting feedback in your practice essays, and get feedback from a native speaker, possibly get it proofread, or you could even send it to me if you've got the sentence guide, and I can tell you, okay? But experiment in your practice essays and try to avoid experimenting when you've paid $300 or euros or whatever for your exam. That's not a wise idea. And by the way, from all corners of the world, or all corners of the world, is a relatively easy idiomatic expression to use, and given the usual topics of IELTS, it's usually something to do with a global issue or education or immigration, whatever, but it usually has a global feel to it, because IELTS, after all, is an international English language test. So using that idiomatic, that figure of speech, could be beneficial, but make sure you've experimented with it first. Now, the next piece of advice I want to give you relates to your paragraphs. Now, to improve the cohesiveness and the coherence of your argument, I have been recommending for the last couple of years now that students go for a simpler argument where there is no risk of tripping up and falling over trying to explain something complex. Because if you're trying to explain a complex argument, then you're going to be using a very large range of grammar structures and possibly even longer sentences, and therefore increasing the risk of making an error. And also, it's more difficult to try and communicate what's in your head onto the paper in front of you. Whereas if you just make it or keep it a relatively basic argument, and remember, we're not getting points for ideas, we're getting points for our grammar, for our language, for writing a coherent argument. And a basic argument is much easier expressed in a coherent way than a complex argument. Let me say that again because it's important. A basic argument, a simple argument, is much easier to communicate and transmit than a complex argument. And the reason is because you're using more solid basic grammar. Not basic grammar, but it's just an easier argument to communicate. Okay, so bear that in mind. Let me give you an example. If I wanted to say that crime rates are increasing because of the lack of opportunities or because of the weakness of the employment market, I could just say that crime has become an increasingly attractive option due to the lack of opportunities found in due to the lack of attractive employment opportunities offered in certain regions of the UK. Okay, now that's fine. That's quite a basic argument, and it could be like a general truth as well, but it's believable. However, if I went a step further and then just tried to explain this point a little bit further, then I don't think that level of detail is necessary, and I'm setting myself up for a mistake. For For example, if I started to say that employment opportunities have become less attractive since the introduction of 0-hour contracts and the gradual reduction of labour rights and employment rights, largely thanks to successive Tory governments, blah 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 blah, then I'm just, even though it may sound clear now, but if you're trying to put this down in writing in your exam, in exam conditions, it's going to be rather a complex task, which you don't want, and it's just going to make the examiner's job even more difficult. So moving on to another point, this is similar to what we were saying before about the idiomatic expressions or figure of speeches. Apply the same rules, like be very, very cautious when if you decide to quote a well-known phrase. Okay, make sure first of all that you know this quote or this phrase word for word perfectly. Okay, and secondly, make sure that it is a world-renowned phrase. Yeah, do not try and translate one from your own language into English, because, as the well-known expression goes, lost in translation. The expression will be lost in translation, and it won't make that much sense. Okay, these kinds of things you could do maybe if you were talking and you've got time and you can sort of like gauge, or you could judge the listener's response. But with writing, you're not there to strengthen it, and you cannot adapt if somebody doesn't understand it. So you're better not taking the risk personally. Okay, and it's rather difficult as well to memorize a phrase word for word and use it in the appropriate option, and, like we said before, judge whether it is well known enough or not. So avoid doing that. Now, another tip is we should really avoid using informal phrases. Now, informal phrases are okay in your spoken English, and you will hear them on American soaps and American sitcoms and British ones as well, Australian ones of course as well. But I'll just give you an idea. Okay, if you're using something like I don't know, the pollution has gotten to a stage where it is so crazy now. Yeah, so crazy. That's not an academic phrase at all, so avoid using that. Also avoid using words that have come into fashion, like epic. Yeah, epic is it's a word that's in fashion at the moment, and people are using it incorrectly, and it definitely doesn't have a place in academic writing. And one final point, make sure you understand the question, and this means at least reading it twice or 3 times. And the importance of this cannot be understated, because over the last couple of weeks, sometimes I'll give students an exercise to write an essay about international marketing, and maybe about 8 out of 10 students usually respond with an essay about international trade. And knowing the difference between international trade and international marketing is important, because well, it is important in this respect, but what's more important, what I'm trying to say, is that knowing the differences between small nuances like that. Okay, because if you get the question wrong, then you're going to write the whole of your essay wrong, and you're going to finish off wrong as well. And this is basically going to crucify your task response points. So bear this in mind and make sure that you do have a good understanding. One way to get around this would be to have a look at 250 questions. If you go to IELTSPodcast.com IELTSPodcast.com/250 written in numbers. There you can download a PDF with lots of sample essays and 250 task 2 questions, and you can start getting into the habit of getting ideas, identifying the question, and then checking on the internet if you have identified the question correctly. And doing this as part of your practice will help you a lot, so you don't make the same mistakes when it comes to the $300 exam day. Now, just a small notice. Now, with the sentence guide, it's now checking. I'm now checking the academic task 1 and general task 1 as well. So you're basically going to be writing in total 10 essays, and 7 of those are checked, and you get feedback. You get the video outlining where you went wrong, how to improve it, what vocabulary to use, and so now is a good time to have a look at that, and that's available at IELTSPodcast.com/SG. Okay, all the best, and yes, I hope you keep going. And next week there's a good podcast all about motivation and strategies to prepare for the exam. All the best.